By the time I was 13, my mom sat down with my brother and I and said, "You guys can't ever drink." She looked at me and she said, "And you in particular can't drink." The social worker said, "We're pretty sure your daughter's part native, but the biological mother wouldn't say." Okay, whatever. Why can't I drink? Because I'm native.
Hang on a sec. So this is 60's scoop?
I found that out later. I remember talking one time about my biological mom, and I got slapped for it. Don't talk about that.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
Hey, Tammy, how are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for joining me today. Let's not waste any time. You have a story to tell, a very powerful story. You're a person in long-term recovery. Why don't you tell us how your experiences with substances got started?
I was with my biological family until I was about 4.5, and I was in a family of 10 children. Oh, I guess 15 actually.
Mhm.
It was a blended family. And consequently to that, I was the only one given up for adoption. It was an abusive situation with my mother. Consequently, with psychiatry involved, they deemed that I couldn't go back. So I was adopted into a family. That lasted a year, and I was abused in that family as well.
Mm.
So 2 women by the time I was 6 years old, I was abused. And so I landed in my family in Malville by the time I was 7, so in and out of foster care. And just before probably my parents that raised me came and got me, I remember being blamed for something that I didn't do. And I remember thinking, my hands were on my head, and I was sitting there and I was just like, I'm never going to trust anybody again. And from then on, it was like, screw you. Like, I'm just going to be a fighter. And that kind of defined my fighting attitude, which in some aspects probably saved my life going forward.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was a key moment for me. So my parents came and got me in Prince Albert, and I was raised in Melville, Saskatchewan, and I had a fairly good home. A very, very religious family,
Mhm.
raised quite strongly in an evangelical home. I was entrenched in it. We went to church every Sunday, sometimes twice a week, but I didn't fit in. And also, I wasn't allowed to talk about anything. I remember talking one time about my biological mom, and I got slapped for it. Don't talk about that. I remember talking about my family just before. Don't talk about that. I got slapped for that. So, your life before didn't happen.
Mm.
And I had memories. And as I got older, I was getting angrier and angrier. Grade 2 came along, and there was a teacher there who sexually abused a few of us. Well, what she told me was, you can't tell anyone, no one's going to believe you, and you'll get adopted again.
Did you say she?
A she,
So
a female.
another woman.
Another woman.
Okay.
Mom was good. It's just that we fought. We fought all the time. Anything she said, if she said it was black, I said it was white. I just didn't trust women.
So you were contributing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But looking back, I was small and I just didn't trust women. It wasn't her fault. I remember my mom and dad sat down with my brother and I and said, okay, this is what alcohol does. It destroys families, and you guys can't ever drink. She looked at me and she said, "And you in particular can't drink." I said, "Well, why?" And she says, "Well, we were told that Indigenous people," at that time she would have used Native people or Indian people, because this is in the 70s, 80s, that their bodies can't handle it as much. Well, when she walked away from that conversation, I was mad. I was like, well, that's not right. To me, that sounded racist. I already had a sense of fighting for justice, and I kind of found my family racist, to be honest with you. And I felt dirty, actually, when she walked away. I felt dirty. It probably was about a year later where I was introduced to alcohol. And as a kid, I didn't listen to my mom, and I tried alcohol. I was offered 3 beer. I remember it distinctly. 1 beer. I drank it, couldn't stand the taste of it. So someone gave me a beer with, I don't know if it was rye or whiskey or whatever you put inside the beer to make it taste better. I drank 3 of them back to back, and I loved it. And I got extremely drunk, got sick, but I loved it. I remember I chased it. I was already a fighter, but I was one of those fighters who fought bullies. I didn't bully kids, but I bullied the bullies. So if kids were getting bullied, I would go after the bullies. Didn't matter how big they were. I was tiny. That's the kind of kid I was. Justice. If things were unfair, that's the kind of kid I was. So when I drank, that feeling of power just felt more powerful. That's how I felt. And I loved it. And that feeling of not belonging, all of a sudden I belonged. That group of people, I just felt like I belonged. But there was consequences because I wasn't allowed to drink. So you can't really hide it. I'm sick, so I'd get grounded. Anytime I drank, I'd be grounded if I got caught, right? So that was my whole junior high school year. Drink, get grounded, consequences after consequences. So it wasn't like I got away with it a lot. Come to high school years, I met a boyfriend. We dated through high school, basically grade 10, 11, and 12. He was a couple years older than me. While he was in university, we continued to date. That relationship was also my introduction to domestic violence. I was absolutely head over heels with him. He was what I thought was my savior because he stood up for me. He stood up for me with my mom. You're young. You don't know any better. And it didn't start off violent, but it became violent. And interestingly enough, my mom recognized it when I didn't. She's like, he's too obsessed. He expects you to be home at a certain time. This is before cell phones. But I thought it was love. First time it happened when I was at a bush party. We'd been drinking. I said I needed to be home because I had a curfew. And he got mad and said, I'm not driving you home right now. Your mom can whatever, deal with it. And I panicked because I knew if I didn't get home, I'd be grounded again. And he slapped me right in front of everybody. And one of the guys that was my best friend, actually his cousin, they got into it, and then he drove me home. And my friend said to me, like, why do you put up with that? And then, whatever, he just got mad, he was drinking, and I accepted it. And there was another time, again, trying to drop me off, he grabbed my arm, I wanted to get out of the car, he didn't let me, I came in with bruises, my brother noticed it. There is enough times, there is enough warnings, but I just accepted it.
Thought it was normal?
I didn't think it was normal, but I thought I could change him, which was a theme. It's a theme that kind of goes on in my life for quite a while. I could change him if I just loved them hard enough. And really, when I look back now, I've had therapy. It's the codependent stuff. It's also related to my early stuff. I can't abandon people. It's either I'm going to get abandoned or I can end it, but I have to end it. I'm going to leave you before you leave me. I did eventually end it, but it took a good beating. He almost killed me. Yeah. He almost killed me.
So how did you move forward from that? Like, did that impact your substance use, your drinking? Like, how did you deal with it when you escaped that?
When we moved to Saskatoon, that's when my drinking really increased, which is why I ended up not finishing school. I ended up not doing my fine option for my dangerous driving and DUI. I ended up in jail. I was almost homeless by then. By then I'd left him, going from one guy to another. And then I ended up in jail, which is when I found out I was pregnant with my oldest son. Which was in some aspects, I always say, that is a blessing. I think my higher power was looking out for me, because by then I was doing other drugs. I was doing cocaine. I was doing mushrooms. I was whatever, you name it. I was doing whatever was handed to me.
So what did life look like for you during that time leading up to prison? Like, were you like going to the bar a lot? Were you getting in, like, if you're doing harder drugs, is there gang involvement, or like what did that look like that led up to?
There wasn't gang involvement, but there was every night at the bar, hooking up with anybody. By the time I met Tyson, or my oldest son's dad, I had settled down a little bit, so I was with him for a few months. But up until I met him, I was with whoever, whenever. There was a few times where I was raped. I took me a while to figure out that that's what it was, but that's what it was, to the point where I'd put myself in risky situations and just gave in, because I knew if I didn't, I was going to be hurt. So just give in. And basically doing that, so I had a place to live, somewhere to sleep. I learned that when I went to rehab, basically that's what I was doing, just to have somewhere to go.
You mentioned rape. you didn't realize that at the time, you said. Like,
There was a situation, I was working at a coffee shop. So I'd met some people, and this one guy offered to give me a ride home. It was in the morning, and he brought a bottle in. I mean, who drinks at 7 in the morning after a night shift?
mm,
So I invited him in. I thought I knew him pretty good. He was an older guy. I mean, this is when I'm 20, 21.
mm-hmm,
And he came in, and he had different intentions.
mm,
And I said no. I said no a couple times, but he just didn't stop, and there was no one around, so I gave in. I never reported him, but talking about it later in therapy, my therapist looked at me and she said, "Tammy, you were raped."
mm.
I was like, "Yeah, I was, wasn't I?" And he did come into the coffee shop later, and I couldn't even look at him. I mean, I shook. So I know. And
Yeah.
there was other situations. Yeah.
So even though you've had all these experiences with men and with different things that were pretty traumatic,
Mhm.
it wasn't until you found that out that you turned to the bottle to survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
hmm I mean, I had probably turned to the bottle before that when I came out. I came out in 2002,
Mm,
but not as much, not as hard. I mean, I drank a little bit more because my parents disowned me then, which I expected. But I had lots of support. My ex-husband supported me. Nobody turned against me other than my family,
mm,
which I expected. They eventually sort of came around, never completely, because they've never met my partner.
mm.
They never met my partners. You can be gay, you just can't live it. You know, be
Hmm.
celibate. Be celibate for the rest of your life. God gave you a challenge.
Oh.
Just live. Yeah, yeah. Uh, that's just how it's a mortal sin. You're gonna go to hell.
Yeah.
But no, when that came out, that killed me.
Why did you go into Pine Grove?
So when I went into Pine Grove, so I was 19 when I got my DUI and dangerous driving. It was actually ridiculous. I mean, I own it, but I'd had about 3 beer that night. I'd had probably 7 24-hour suspensions that summer.
Mm,
I mean, it was coming. Absolutely didn't care about life. I was a teenager in Malville being absolutely stupid and, really looking back now, suicidal. Didn't really care. And obviously didn't care about myself or society. And when I got my DUI that night, it was actually a refusal to blow. I hadn't blown.
mm.
And got the dangerous driving because I was driving absolutely at a high speed, outrunning the police.
Oh.
Yeah. And the school got in the way, so I had to stop. I was doing fine option at the Friendship Inn, and the person who was my boss, we went out for drinks. He sexually assaulted me.
Man, it
And
keeps happening.
yes. Well, when you drink and put yourself in risky situations, that's kind of how I look at it. It's still
Mm.
wrong. It's still wrong what he did.
Yeah.
So I didn't go back. And I could have went to John Howard Society and reported it. I didn't because I'm holding the shame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not reporting it. So I ended up in jail in Pine Grove. It was actually Elizabeth Fry who came and talked to me while I was in jail. They asked me, like, what are you doing here? You don't have a long line of criminal activity. I told them my story. So I got out on institutional fine option, actually. They helped me. And so I was supposed to be there for a couple months. I got out in like 3 weeks or something like that. And that was when I found out I was pregnant, came out. And that's actually where my drinking did slow down because I came out, stopped using anything, right? Because I found out I was pregnant. Thank the Lord, Tyson was okay. And slowed down my drinking, met my husband my ex-husband at 7 months pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up getting married when Tyson was 2, had our son Chad, and I slowed down. Like I became what you call a weekend bender. And so when the kids were little, I just didn't. I stayed away from it for a while. So it's kind of like I went into remission for a bit. But then as they got older, just a little older, I'm not talking many years here, then I started to drink again.
Mm-hmm.
It's a progression.
Yeah.
Kind of go back to where you were. It didn't take long.
Mm-hmm.
And Al was happy to stay home with them. So it kind of started with, I'm going to go after work with the girls. Okay. Love you, honey. Go. He let me go. And we've talked about it now. We're still really good friends. And it didn't take long. And I remember saying to Al, like after we went through our separation and divorce, I said, why didn't you tell me I was an alcoholic? And he's like, he wouldn't have listened. I mean, it just got to the point where I was just going out all the time and he was staying home with the kids.
So did you know, like you said, you came out, was there always something in the back of your mind growing up and going through your early adulthood and stuff like that? Or was this like, whoa, what's happening right now?
Both, actually. When you're raised in a Christian environment where being gay and lesbian is absolutely a definite no and it's never talked about, I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
Looking back, there was absolutely I had some crushes. The first time I ever had feelings for a woman, which was my first partner, after Al and I was absolutely disgusted with myself. I hated myself. I absolutely hated myself for a while. And that also increased the drinking. Absolutely, for sure. I was actually the kind that was very homophobic and would actually, like, probably beat the crap out of them if they hit on me. That's how homophobic I was. So when I had feelings for women, I was angry. I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like,
And you
no.
try to drown it.
Yeah, I did. Like for the first bit when I first came out. And that's actually probably what split my first partner and I up. We were together for 2.5 years.
You mentioned gambling. And we just sort of, and you told me a little bit about it before, like when we talked on Friday, that got pretty significant in your life. Before we jump into recovery here, tell us a little bit about how that came to be and how that played a part.
So gambling, my ex-partner, we drank a lot together, but she was a gambler, and I actually used to go into the bars and take her out. Another codependent thing I used to do, but just like I hated it. I hated the VLTs. For 5 years I probably did that. And then one time when we were drinking in one of our local bars that I attended regularly, I had a friend with me, and my partner was gambling in the back, as she usually does. And my friend looked at me. Actually, it was, I won't forget it because it was actually my birthday. And she says, and she didn't gamble either. And she says, let's just put in $20. And I was like, no, Judy, I hate these things. And she's like, no, let's just put in $20. I said, okay. So we put in 20. First spin didn't win anything. Second spin, we won $1,000. And it was like, holy shit. And like, I remember that too. I remember that feeling instantly. It was like cocaine to the brain. And we just continued. The next day we were going to Winnipeg, and we just kept going, and we kept winning. Now a fair amount of money. So yeah, for the first few months, we just kept winning. Of course, there was times we lost. So for about a year, I kept winning money. And then within, I ended up losing enough that I ended up selling my first house, moving in with my partner because, we're going to save money, which was absolutely a stupid move to make because our house doubled in price by the time within 3 months after I sold it. Then I ended up buying another house and selling that house, consolidating debt. So really, at the end of the day, when I look at it, I sold 2 houses. I mean, my credit was maxed. My everything was maxed. My ex-partner and I were writing checks to each other to deposit. We were going to Easy Cash, Money Mart, like you name it. We were doing everything a gambler does to feed their fix. And I was having panic attacks. I ended up in the hospital, thinking I was having a heart attack, but it was absolute anxiety attack. I was waking up in the morning, like just stressed to the max. I was starting to miss work. I was supposed to be running a group on a Thursday night, and I would skip it, saying I was sick to go gamble.
Here's something else that we didn't talk about. You're a service provider.
Yes.
Like a frontline mental health service provider.
Yeah.
Through a lot of this story.
By the time my drinking and gambling increased, I had taken about 1.5 years off. So I did take some time off. So when I took some time off, my drinking had increased to about 3 to 4 days a week. My twin brother was now living in Saskatoon. And I was drinking with him. He had lost custody of his children. And he was losing custody of his children. And I was going to support him and I was actually looking after a lot of his children. And so that's where, when it says you start drinking with people you shouldn't be drinking with, well, he was the one I shouldn't have been drinking with. But nobody else was drinking like I wanted to drink. But he did, because my twin's a hardcore alcoholic.
And you were working.
And I was working at mental health and addictions, to the point where, my nieces and nephews saw that. And I was their auntie. I was their auntie who was helping them and supporting them. And we talk about that now. And like looking back now, I'm like, how could you?
Mm.
So my drinking was increasing, and I was still fighting. Like I don't know if I mentioned that, but I was kind of a scrapper when I drank. I had that switch, I'd be having fun and partying, and all of a sudden the switch would come off, and 9 times out of 10 in a blackout, don't remember, but kind of would come in and out of blackouts, and next thing you know, I'm fighting for whatever purpose. My anger would come out.
Mm.
And ironically, when I was working in mental health and addictions, and still to this day, I ran a group called Anger and Relationships. I ran groups for intimate partner violence, teaching people how not to be violent. And yet on the weekends, sometimes I was getting into fights.
Mm-hmm.
I know now that I am sober and have been in recovery, I'm a much better therapist than I was then. Not to say that I don't know the steps of how not to be violent, but yes, I was what I thought a functioning alcoholic. I know now I was not a functioning alcoholic. When I first got into it, I didn't see myself any different than any other counselors or addiction workers, because lots of times we'd go to conferences and we'd all go for drinks.
Yeah.
So that leads me to, like, when you asked the question about my gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So I could drink and I guess get away with it because it was acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
But gambling took me to a darker place. Gambling and drinking hand in hand took me to a darker place.
Mm.
And that took me to a place of suicidal thoughts. I hadn't been suicidal since I was a teenager. I wasn't telling anybody about it because of the shame.
Mm.
Gambling, I could hide longer. People didn't need to know about it. It was like a secret society. Those who gamble, and let me tell you, there's a lot. And a lot in the service field as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have our own little secret society. You don't tell people. Don't tell anybody I was here, right? You just, that's what you say. Don't tell anybody I'm doing this. And we did that. And we would, basically cover for each other. And it got to the point where, when I was starting to lose everything and I was contemplating suicide, and then you drink on top of that, I was looking for places to drive off, like Thelma and Louise, and then laughing about it the next day and thinking, thank God I was too drunk to do that.
Mm.
I was at the point one time where I had a gun to my head. Yeah, it just took me to dark places. And so even that didn't get me to go to rehab.
What was it that brought you into recovery? What was that defining moment?
The final clincher, I tried to sober up a couple months. My grandfather had died. I knew that was going to make me cry. And I thought I could sober up for him.
Mm.
And I had for 2 months. I'd quit. I quit gambling, quit drinking, because he was my hero. And then I went to go visit my friend in Edmonton. And my kids came. And they were 17 and 14 at the time. And she has kids the same age. My 17-year-old is, he was 18 because he was legal in Alberta.
Mm.
So he wanted some alcohol too. I said, okay, you're legal. So he got some. So I drank that night. And of course I drank hard. He's partying downstairs with his friends. We're upstairs partying with our friends. I ended up with someone that night. I don't remember how I ended up with him. I was in a blackout. Let's just put it this way. It was the most shameful thing that I could ever do for myself, because it was someone pretty damn close to Tyson's age. The next morning, my son approaches Shar, my friend, and makes a comment to her. I'm not going to get into it. But at the end of the day, she says, that wasn't me, that was your mom. And he looks at me, and the look of shame on his face put me to the ground. I haven't had a drink since.
Let's take a quick break.
Pisce, mashinaikan, pushche, mitchef. sacred document from Métis.
Métis Nation Saskatchewan is pursuing its own sacred document with Canada. It's what they've been fighting for since 1885, since Louis Riel died for the right to self-government. It's time for Métis people to take control of their own fate, for their ancestors, for their citizens, and for the generations to come.
It's our moment.
It's my future.
The time is now. Learn more at ourmoment.ca.
Okay. EHN Canada is Canada's leading provider of mental health and addiction services, providing evidence-based and medically assisted care with 1-year wraparound services for those suffering from substance use disorder. To learn more, find their link in the show notes below. Pine Lodge, the treatment center I went to 7 years ago when I got sober, offers inpatient addictions treatment and aftercare programming in Regina, Saskatchewan. To inquire about services or make a donation, call 306-510-1891. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness-related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals locally, allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. To make contact or learn more about today's sponsors, to check out our merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below.
I found out I was Métis when I met my biological family. I asked my mom, I said, "Are we Métis?" She actually denied it. And, but there was enough other relatives that said, "We're Métis."
Mm-hmm.
I started questioning her again later, and finally she said, "We were told to tell everybody we were French." And as I've done the research and learned more from some uncles and stuff, like my grandparents actually lived quite traditionally in aspects. There's a lot of hunters and trappers in the family. Out of the 10 biological children, I'm the first one to get my Métis citizenship. And that was by working through with Métis Nation Saskatchewan and finding out how to do all this. And so with This Is Our Moment, with Métis Nation Saskatchewan, it's so important for me, and just thinking of why treaty is so important when I think of my history being adopted. I didn't know when I got my adoption records, I actually just got them a while ago, that actually throughout the whole adoption process, both of them, it says I'm Métis. And I was part of AIM. So I found out from my aunts and uncles.
What's AIM?
Adopt an Indian Métis child. So in part of the 60's scoop. That I actually was Métis. It does say I'm Métis, and I had a few aunts and uncles say we weren't allowed to adopt you. So I don't want it to take away from my parents that raised me, because I had a good home and they fought to have a child too. But my life may have been a little bit different. I don't want to take away from who raised me, because they did a fantastic job considering what was given to them, because I wasn't easy. I'm going to say that, and I love them. But Métis people should have the right to have say over where their children go. And that's what treaty would give. Métis people would have the right to govern mental health and addiction, and the say over their own education, say over their land-based healing, say over
their own school system,
over their exactly. Just knowing how I grew up, and I really am looking forward to Métis Nation Saskatchewan having their own treaty.
Let's take a step back. I don't feel like we've done an effective job, because you talked about not realizing things until you were in treatment. Like not realizing the things that had happened to you and how that had impacted you. Let's talk about that for a minute. You went into Pine Lodge. What was it like going into Pine Lodge? Like, what was it like accepting, okay, I need to stop. I'm a service provider. I know how to fill the forms out at least, right? So what did that look like? Like, tell us about that process, being a frontline service provider for mental health and addictions and needing to access those services.
Well, thankfully, I had really great employers.
Okay.
At that time, I was working in response to violence team, where I was when I left. And the one thing my coworkers, my employers will always say is, "Tammy, you are the most honest person we know." I said, "I'm struggling with alcohol and gambling, and like I'm just not doing well." And they knew it. I mean, let's face it, they knew me pretty well. And I mean, I had my boss already coming to my door and saying, "What's going on with you?" In between clients, I would close my door and I'd be crying. When I went to Pine Lodge, honestly, Daniel, I wasn't convinced I was an alcoholic. Gambling, I knew I had a
Really?
problem.
Even after the experiences with your
No,
sons and all
no,
that? Really?
I thought I could control it.
Okay.
I thought gambling was more of the issue,
Mm-hmm.
and if I could stop that, then I could control the drinking. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. No, in fact, my cousin will tell you because she dropped me off. I had said to her, "I'll show these guys." I swore, I'll give them a year. That was my attitude going in.
So what was it like when you started to, because like I know what happened for me in Pine Lodge, you go in there, you think you know something, and then, and then when you're halfway through, you discover you don't want to leave.
That's true. That's true. And I didn't. I didn't. I embraced it. In fact, I was quite scared to leave because you feel safe there, and you got this community and the support that you've never had.
And what was it like when you came to these realizations in treatment? Like you'd mentioned before, like you didn't realize that rape was part of your experience. You didn't realize that this trauma was impacting you so bad. Now, when you came to these realizations, did it feel like a weight came off or that a weight came on?
A bit of both. Because that's when I realized, well, I still have some more work to do. I need to, or kind of like that. This is what happened. This is how it impacted me. This is how it's still impacting me. And now what do I do with it? I still had a now what do I do with it? Need to work on it. And so it's still been a journey. I that's why I didn't do very well on resentment day because I couldn't go there. And I found out that like I couldn't really touch on the Lorraine issue, which was my biological mother or my first adopted mother. I really could not go there.
You couldn't allow yourself to feel the resentment
because there was too much rage.
Yeah.
And so when she started pushing me, I just started to laugh. I just remember looking at her saying, "This is ridiculous. I can't." I said, "Deanna, I've dealt with this in therapy," and realized I hadn't, and that I just wanted to laugh it off because I was picturing that little 4-year-old and 5-year-old and how hurt she must have been. And then I finally looked at her and said, "Deanna, it's too much. It's too much today. I get what you're going, but I need to deal with this elsewhere." Right? And I have. Obviously, I can still talk about it and I can bring it up, but it is hard to imagine in some aspects how much that small child dealt with and had to keep in for so long. I understand why I drank. Wasn't good, but I understand why I did. Yeah.
And you didn't understand that until you got into Pine Lodge?
No.
So for me, like when I, and we'll talk a bit of program here, like when I went into my step 4, when I'd entered recovery, and step 4 is about inventory. When I came to realize that I was an asshole too, like it almost, like it made me legitimately feel better. Like I was like, oh, I did deserve some of that shit, like, and it made me feel lighter. Can you relate to that?
I can. Interestingly enough, I didn't have too much of a problem of being like I was an asshole when, or I was, what was the word they used?
Oh man, I can't remember now.
And still doing those, like that does make me feel better, and making kind of the amends and stuff. That stuff makes me, and I'm still, or I was irresponsible when.
Yeah. I remember that it was almost like a chant.
Yeah.
I was irresponsible. And you can do, and we need you to have 50.
Yeah, no problem. Looking at, okay, like even for instance, stuff where I was sexually assaulted. Okay, that's the stuff I had a hard time. What do you mean my part in that? But I look back at it now and go, yeah, which is sometimes what I tell some of the people I work with. It's like, what they did was wrong. That's their part. Absolutely. But my part is I put myself in risky situations with my drinking. And those are hard conversations to have. And that was hard for me to accept. But that's how I was able to accept it. And that's what helped me in Pine Lodge a lot. And then moving forward. It's because actually, since I've sobered up, none of that's ever happened. Yeah.
So let's talk about your first year then. Your first year in recovery. Did you jump out? Did you jump into the program? Because I mean, Pine Lodge is 12-step house, right? So, well, you get through your first 3. And in any case, so were you happy to leave? I was scared to leave.
I was scared, and I think I told you this when we were talking the other day. I was scared, excited. I miss my family, but I was scared. And I remember Still hearing Deanna and Susan Almer, God bless her. I
Mm.
miss her.
Rest her soul.
Yes, feisty woman, but she meant well.
Yeah.
Chirping 90 and 90, 90 and 90. And I'm still thinking to myself,
Yeah.
I don't have time. But I did. And there was somebody, my roommate in recovery. We both graduated a day apart from each other.
Yeah.
And we're very competitive. And so we did the 90 and 90. And I understand the 90 and 90 from the clinical's perspective. It's like to develop that habit, right? Replace a habit. And it did. And I have at least 3 best friends to this day that I met because of that. And I found at least 3 solid meetings from doing that I really liked. I went to some meetings that I thought sucked. There's some meetings, sick people go to AA, let's face it.
What?
There's some sick people that go to AA.
Get out.
And you personalities rub, and so you may not like them.
Yeah.
And so it was a good thing that I went to a lot, because otherwise I would have been like, holy shit. Yeah, so for the first while I went, and I did go to my return visits, and kind of embraced it, joined the alumni, whatever. For the first 2 or 3 years, I did have a sponsor actually, for a while. My sponsor actually relapsed. My sponsor died of suicide. It's been quite a while, so that was hard. That was really hard. I stayed sober through it. And thankfully I had a good group of people who we all supported each other. I don't have a sponsor now, but I have solid AA people that we kind of sponsor each other. That's just kind of how we look at it. I have a counselor. 3 years into my sobriety is I met my partner in recovery, which they say, oh, you probably shouldn't meet someone in recovery.
What do you mean? I've heard not in the first year. I've never heard just don't ever date anyone.
It was in her first year.
Oh, you didn't?
I did.
Oh, you can't do that.
I know, and I 13 stepped.
Oh my God. You just said sick people are in those rooms, so.
I know. Anyway, so I did meet my partner in recovery, and we started dating, and yeah, so it was a bit of a roller coaster. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And she fell off. She was close to a year. She fell off. People can have their opinions. She fell off hard. My partner, long benders. I stayed because I thought she would. She did recover. She did rehab and AA and all bunch of different things. Would get months in, and then it's been a roller coaster. 13 years of up and down. That's why I'm going to talk about you for a second. She still does NA and AA once in a while. Lots of times, like she almost didn't make it. Lots of hospital trips. We did live together. I ended up having to move out. The last few years was checking on her to see if she was going to be alive. She started watching your podcast. And honestly, I was pissed off.
Oh?
I was like, that podcast isn't going to work. Like, you gotta get out, because she was doing the online meetings. And I'm one of those people that's like, okay, that's fine, but you need to get out. The clinician in me is like, you need to connect with people.
I don't think you're wrong.
No. But because I could see, like, because she'd just been isolated. She hadn't really been leaving her house in like almost a year, 2 years. She just wasn't leaving, almost agoraphobic. And I was at the point, like, literally, I had just distanced myself to the point where, like, I love you, but it's taken me down, and just checking on her to see if she was alive, phoning an ambulance if I needed to, or getting her to. I was actually at the point where if you can call me, you can call an ambulance. Anyway, yeah, she started watching your podcast and slowly embracing that and getting herself out to a meeting if she could. And by the grace of God, she's coming up a year here right away. And yeah, it's been the best year ever, but it's been hard. But I do refer your podcast to a lot of people. And I do watch some of it, not as much as her, because I don't have the time, but I have been watching it. I still want people to go out to things, but so they can hear it. They can hear the stories and see how hard it is.
Well, and we have a bit of a different flavor, like we're not in the church basements. I mean, I go sometimes, not as much as I used to, maybe not unlike yourself.
Yeah.
But we step out of that structure where we're out here where there's all kinds of people finding wellness in all kinds of different ways. And it's important that people know there are other ways, because the rooms don't work for everyone.
No. Well, and like I say, what I say to people about the meetings is I still say it, and I say it to my own clients. I say, whatever works for you works. I said, but if you're going to go to meetings, sorry, don't worry about the 12 steps. Just go to have someone to talk to stay sober with. Go and hear their stories. Go and leave the stuff that you don't like, because trust me, you're going to hear things you don't like. Because I didn't like it all.
Yeah.
And I said, and down the road, if the 12 steps work for you, great. I was in probably 3-4 years before I ever embraced the 12 steps. And I wouldn't even say I embraced them, but I did do them. And step 4 is what helped me get over my stuff with God. Because I was abused in the church. So
hang on now. There's something else we didn't even touch on, your stuff with God. So
Yeah.
when you were growing up immersed in the church, and these things happened to you, and we're being told that God is a loving God and you have to pray and he'll watch out for you and all of the things, very topical now. Now that I know and understand religion and a little bit of theology, but we're supposed to be protected if we pray and go to church and stuff like that. So you developed a negative relationship with God at some point, correct?
I still believe in God and Jesus, but not in the way that I was brought up.
Did you stop believing?
Well, I was, again, we were at an ashram, and I was, one of the guys that my mom really trusted attempted to molest me when I was 14. So I was to the point, if God loves me so much, why does this keep happening? But I did have a love for Jesus, and Jesus' words are beautiful, and he doesn't talk about homosexuality at all. He talks about loving people, forgiving people, helping people. And I'm like, people, you got it wrong. If you just listen to Jesus' words, life would be good. So that's my belief. It's a constant journey, and I'm still learning. I'm still gaining awareness. It never stops. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much, Tammy.
Thanks.
Take care. Okay, if you got something out of that, please hit that like button at the bottom of the screen. If you're not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment. I am all about fostering productive conversations about substance use, and I can't do it alone. So let me know your thoughts. That's all I got for you. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.